Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Stop Chasing Charts for Risk Adjustment. We're excited you could join us for today's 45-minute session. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be introducing today's event. Today, our two expert speakers will be introducing an AI-enabled strategy for streamlining risk adjustment. By leveraging clinical data feeds they already have access to, health plans can reduce costs, inefficiencies, and provider abrasion while improving risk adjustment accuracy. We are thrilled to be joined here today by two industry experts, Stephen Burko, Head of Value-Based Care Market Strategy at InterSystems, and Julie Smith, Head of Global Healthcare Market Strategy at InterSystems. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will be answering these questions during the second portion of this live webcast. If a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, questions may be answered later via email, but most questions will be included in our discussion today. So we hope that you'll participate in the conversation. To kick off, I'd like to ask Stephen to introduce himself. So Stephen, can you tell us about your background and your work?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. I've been in healthcare as a GM and executive for entering my third decade on both the plan and the provider side. But about 2 years ago, I actually joined InterSystems because I decided, at least for this chapter, I really wanted to play a weight-bearing role in helping the industry unlock the power of clinical data exchange. And that is something, for people who don't know InterSystems has really been at the center of for quite some time.
Wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you. And Julie, would you like to go next?
Absolutely, thanks. So, my career at InterSystems has spanned almost a decade, but I have the privilege of leading healthcare global market strategy now. And that's really important because InterSystems plays a pivotal role over 40 plus years within healthcare technology. We're the backbone behind Epic, the VA, huge health systems and health plans. And so we have the privilege of being a part of making a difference in people's lives. And that's been a great journey. I started as an emergency room nurse. So I've walked that path through many doors, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it today.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for taking the time. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and Julia.
Thanks, Megan. So you see, I started as a healthcare attorney. I don't seem to think that connotes the same kind of good feeling. Nonetheless, let's get going here. I want to focus everybody on this data point for a moment. That today, more than 60% of Medicare Advantage enrollees have at least one chart review record. And when you look at that statistic, I think it becomes pretty understandable why, as an industry, we are really starting to have a lot of problems and strain with the level of chart chasing going on. And it's not just the cost. When you really start to sum up the full cost, the fully loaded cost of chart chasing, you got the direct cost, and that is sizable. But as I'm sure many people on the line know, you're increasingly experiencing provider abrasions, just providers struggling to deal with the onslaught of charts that plans are requesting. And there's also frustration with the retrospective nature of what the plan is getting back. All too often, once the chart comes back and it's reviewed, it's really too late for care management to take advantage of a timely insight. Now, all that said, it is understandable why chart chasing is ballooning. And I'm going to focus a little bit here on Medicare Advantage because that's the area where we have the best national data. And what you see in the pie is just the factors impacting payment to Medicare Advantage or MA plans. And you can see I'm just up to 2 factors, and I'm already up to 20% of plan revenues. And these are 2 factors that are heavily dependent upon clinical documentation. So obviously risk adjustment, and then also CMS stars ratings or the quality bonus. Now, again, today we're focusing on risk adjustment. And before we set sail, I just want to re-anchor everybody in the purpose of risk adjustment and why it's so important. It really is the vehicle we use in North America to ensure plans and providers have the needed resources to care for the more complex or sicker patients. And recognizing all the advances that have made with value-based care, it is still costly to take care of these more complicated patients. So today or recently, I mean, this is rising to $80 billion. So, just pulling back for a second, you can begin to see why it's so critical to get this right. It's so critical to get this right just for the financial health of the health plan, but again, also to ensure that the plan has the necessary resources to take care of those sicker or more complex patients. And then if we begin to break this down, you can really begin to see why chart chasing, why there's so many demands to grab charts. So chart chasing, in effect, accounting for $24 billion of these revenues. And just a couple of thoughts on the other pieces of the pie. So that $10 billion HRAs, or health risk assessments, that's where the necessary underlying diagnoses are being documented in terms of the greater complexity of the patient. And I want everybody to put a pin in that, because increasingly we're probably going to have to rely on chart review for that as well, due to a new rule taking effect next year having to do with linked charts. And the other big piece of the pie here is actually the claims. For people who are familiar with the claims administration process, this is the submitted claim, which includes the diagnoses. But again, this is another area where you have to put a pin in it, because increasingly there's greater pressure to have medical documentation backing up the claim to support the inclusion of that diagnosis in the risk adjustment. So I know that was really quickly, but I think increasingly the question that plans, ACOs, and our entire industry, we really need to begin asking ourselves, is the chart chasing that was built up over time to support this, is that going to be sustainable moving forward, keeping in mind that we already seem to be kind of at a breakage point in terms of what we can sustain, and the amount of clinical documentation is beginning to spike. I mean, this is not tapping down, it's taking a curve upwards. So current course and speed, unless we rethink how we do this, we're going to have to actually do more and more and more of this. So let me delve into the details here just a little bit. What you see on the screen is my very, very quick primer on Medicare Advantage risk adjustment. And I know for some people on the phone, this is going to be super basic, but I hope we also have other people on the phone from other key stakeholders, technology, interoperability. And I just want to be sure everybody kind of has a certain level playing field as we get in deeper into this discussion. So the first thing I have up here is the two terms that everybody should be aware of. One is the risk adjustment factor, or the RAF score. And this is a numerical value that's calculated every year by Medicare to estimate a patient's expected healthcare costs. It's calculated based on demographics. And again, here's the key point: documented diagnoses, and it's actually calculated for the next year based on the prior year. So, John, every Medicare Advantage member, there's going to be a RAF score every year for the coming year. So then what CMS does is it conducts something called risk adjustment data validation audits, or RADV audits, just to make sure, obviously, that the diagnoses being submitted to drive the RAF scores are accurate. And you can see right on the page what this is doing. They verify the diagnoses codes submitted by the plans are supported by appropriate documentation in the provider medical records. Now, this is an audit, current course and speed. They do not do this for every Medicare Advantage member. They do it for a subset of them. Just a few more details on the RADV audit. So 3 months. So number one, the plans must show that the submitted diagnosis codes reflect conditions that were documented during a face-to-face encounter within the payment year. That documentation must meet what's known in the industry as the meet criteria. Now, I want to be clear here. CMS does actually not say meet criteria. It's a mnemonic used by the industry to make sure when you're reviewing the chart, hey, is this condition being actively managed? Is it being monitored and or evaluated and or assessed and or treated? And the third one's really important here, that the chronic or permanent conditions must be redocumented each year during a face-to-face patient encounter. And why this is so important is because there's a number of things a provider is monitoring or working on or managing during the year for which there is no immediate reimbursable claim. And so many of our providers still are largely in a fee-for-service world, so they have no real push to submit a diagnostic code for something that they're managing, but again, there's no reimbursable service. So you begin to understand why plans need to actually go into the medical record so frequently to make sure that they're capturing all the diagnoses that those providers are managing. So if you pull back on this slide for a second, all we're talking about is the status quo. And remember, I put a few pins in place because I keep referring to the fact that this demand for clinical documentation, if you already feel like we're struggling to keep up, providers are frustrated, it's going to continue to spike. And that's what I try to capture on the next slide. And the real push for this is not dramatic changes in the RAF scoring, it's actually in the RADV audit. And what you see here are the changes. We're already beginning a dramatic expansion in the scope and the cadence of RADV audits. So let me just go through these to give you a sense that this is really beginning to spike. So looking backwards, when CMS did RADV audits, they typically went after around 60 contracts per cycle per audit. And now moving forward, they've shared that they're going to actually audit all 550 plus Medicare Advantage contracts on an annual basis. So the next one, sample size. For each audit, it's usually around 35 enrollees per contract. Now, CMS has said, you know what, depending upon this number of people who are actually, the members under that contract, they're going to do up to 200 enrollees per contract. Also the cadence. Across the past couple of years, we've kind of fallen behind as an industry in how current we are with those audits. So instead of starting an audit annually, they're going to start one every 3 months. We've already begun that because they want to catch up. And then the last one hasn't taken effect yet, starts to take effect at the beginning of next year. I alluded to this, and this is how unlinked chart reviews are being dealt with or managed. Historically, if a plan was able to identify a diagnosis via often a health risk assessment, they could submit that diagnosis. That was called an unlinked chart review. It was allowed starting in 2027. Now, all diagnoses from chart reviews actually must be linked to a patient encounter. So again, more pressure that we find that diagnosis in the medical record and in a medical record that can actually be linked to an existing claim. So you can begin to get a feel of why there's so much stress out there in terms of, wow, we're already starting to bust at the seams with the level of chart chasing going on. We just can't sustain this going forward, which really, prompts the question, if you kind of get out of the risk adjustment conversation and into the interoperability conversation, which, as Julie alluded to, we've really had the privilege of having a hand in both cookie jars. You start to wonder, wait, with all these advances in data liquidity, isn't there a better way to now capture the needed clinical data for risk adjustment? And with that, I'm going to tap out and let Julie tap in.
Thanks, Stephen. So I had to laugh when I first saw this slide and thought about how to talk about it, because this is a screenshot of a CCDA. And for those of you who are have been in the industry a while or have seen these before, it is the sort of painful to read, but fairly comprehensive clinical summary of an encounter. And so it really offers an opportunity to say, what data do you already have available today that you can already receive in a defined format that could potentially help address some of this lift, right? Because the overhead involved for RAF and RADV audits is increasing, right? With some of the things that Stephen covered. And you need to have a way to sort of access what data is available and to ensure that it's going to meet the needs that are required of you. And CCDAs are something that's already available today. And some key pieces of this are, right, it is an encounter-based summary record, a clinical summary, and it is already available. It is time-stamped. It is encounter-based. It is electronically signed, right? It already meets the criteria required for validation and audit if you already have these at your fingertips. It includes both structured and unstructured data. And in the era of AI, that really opens up a lot of questions around what can you do with this? And how do you get these in order to address this key challenge? And so CCDAs, while they may have been floating between organizations or fed through different paths, haven't always been leveraged to the extent that they can be. And this really opens up a key opportunity. So where do these come from? When you think about where they come from, you can have lots of different places these come from. You may already be getting them from providers that are in your network, that they feed them through. HIEs, health information exchanges, and national networks are an opportunity, a feed for them. And then obviously there's some data aggregators that also have these. Because these are an industry standard format, they already are fed through many places. If you happen to be an Epic Payer Platform customer, they're available to you through there. So we're seeing increasing adoption and availability across the industry. And that, one of the realities that we've experienced time after time is that a CCDA may already be available within your health plan ecosystem, and you just may not be leveraging it in all of the different ways that you can for these patients in order to get them the most accurate record in order to address their needs. And so I think that that's a really key part of if you have electronic feeds, this is one way that you might be able to leverage it further. And when you think about how you do that, you have to think about what your process is now. And when you do that, I'm going to hand it back to Stephen to sort of walk that through and see where the opportunity lies.
So we work with a number of plans, and what you see on the screen is our best effort to kind of just summarize what we would call the common or the dominant practice, which is in place today. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through it, and then I want to just then walk you through how we're seeing best practice organizations morph this process. So it starts with a lot of retrospective claims analysis, looking at claims history going back fairly far to try to identify those patients or those members who are the sicker, the more complex patients who've historically had what are called HCCs to justify the need for higher payment because they're going to have higher costs. And then from that, often it's a third-party contractor, a plan is hiring to generate a suspect list. Okay, these are the members who are likely to have a higher RAF score, if you will, at least if we're looking back in history. Now we got to go get that clinical documentation. Well, what does that mean? We're going to go now request all those charts from the treating providers. Then we're going to review those charts. We're going to really review those charts for two things. One, we're going to try to pull out the notes, the records that actually satisfy, as we were talking about, the requirements for CMS to justify submitting those diagnosis codes for RAF scoring. And we're going to do it both prospectively and retrospectively. retrospectively, if we've already had claims that have gone in, we want to be sure that we're capturing those clinical records that we can associate with those claims if we're subject to a RADV audit, which again, we're going to be more and more subject to more and more, and also prospectively. We want to just pull out the claims for which we think a diagnostic code might be coming in, or for which we're going to submit a diagnostic code through what's called a supplemental submission or a 837 CRR. And then, of course, we want to be sure that we store that information so if we are subject to a RADV audit, we can readily get it. And the one thing I want everybody to remember is, increasingly we're doing this. It seems like we're going to go through this whole process, and then we're going to have a very, very limited number of members for whom we're going to have to pull charts. We're going to have to impose upon providers to get those charts. But increasingly, this is becoming far more than the lion's share anyway. We're already just requesting charts for a majority of our members. So now I want to show you how this process looks like at leading plans. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to better support that person. We're going to give them better decision support, that person who is reviewing those charts. So we're going to move them over to the end of the process, and we're going to tweak what we're asking them to do a bit. So instead of having to go in and actually do all the distillation, we want to focus on equipping with them with the best information, the diagnostic codes, and the medical records to determine, wait, can we justify submission of a DX code to CMS for this patient? Now, okay, so now how are we going to put them in that position? Well, this now feeds into what Julie was talking about. We want to take advantage of all that clinical data we're already getting, or to say it another way, all the charts we're already getting. I mean, it starts to bang your head against the wall a little bit when you start to say, why am I requesting a chart that another part of my organization has already ingested electronically? And then, Julie alluded to it, then we're going to leverage AI to analyze those data feeds. So let me give you a sense of what best practice organizations are now doing. So the first thing they're doing, that first use case is, wait, I want to go in and I want to pull out from all those CCDA documents all the medical records I need to actually support a submitting diagnosis if I'm subject to a RADV audit. And obviously, I don't want to just pull it out. I want to be sure I archive it in such a way that it's easily gettable when I find out from CMS which members are subject to a RADV audit in which HCC codes. I can also, though, use this information to say, look, I found a diagnosis in those medical records for which there wasn't a claim, and then I can submit a supplemental claim a supplemental diagnosis or data as long as I link it to an existing claim. Those are the principal use cases that we're seeing first up. I will tell you the third use case, which is on the horizon, is can we also better equip our staff that are working with providers to give them data-driven insights in terms of where coding could be more accurate. So on the next slide, just a little bit more detail on how AI is doing this linkage.
Yeah, so I'm going to dive deeper a little bit here. So, Stephen's framed it up a little bit, but I want to hone in on how this really works. So when you have a diagnosis and you need that evidence, right? So you have your 837, then you get some evidence with the CCDA. It is in that marrying of those two together that the AI is working to substantiate diagnoses and claims that will apply to RADV criteria. So, in this particular example, if you look at that first row, A+1, right, and 2 may give you a confidence score that says, hey, you might be missing something here. We found some matches. We want to improve your accuracy by linking a diagnosis to the medical record, which then offers that improved accuracy and joining with a reasonable certainty level, right? Your confidence score, for then your chart reviewer to take a look and say, hey, does this make sense? And can I actually move this one forward? So it's reducing chart chase for the heavy overhead pieces, and it's surfacing up the criteria to say there's an opportunity here for you to have improved transparency, improved accuracy, to have your clinical data already matched up with those encounter-based diagnoses in order to move these forward and have a better profile and perspective of your patients and your members. And so I think that that's really where you go. And you can see, sort of, we depicted this a little bit to say, while evidence may show up in one area, it may actually be appropriate in others. And so it's important to know when that is true and how reliable that is, because this still requires the human to review it and to make the decision after review of the records themselves. And I think that that's really an important piece to understand. This is just offering insight into data in a more comprehensive way to make those decisions. And when you do that, I think you have to ask the question, and we certainly see this in some of the leading organizations we work with, is that you don't want to do this in silo and isolation, because this is an opportunity to say, when I'm using these CCDAs in this case, if I'm pulling them from a different part of the organization, I am increasing the value and reducing provider abrasion, because I'm not re-asking for the same thing over and over. But have I really thought about it comprehensively to say, this is a huge use case, has a huge financial impact on these plans, but am I actually using this and leveraging this in a comprehensive scenario? Because really, if I create a unified member care record from all of these different feeds that I've had, then I can actually use it for much more. I can use it not just for the risk adjustment, but I can use it for quality scoring or gap closure or member engagement and all of the other things that are important to my organization. It creates the opportunity to say, hey, I have this now, and I actually have it in a place that I can use over and over for all of the needs that are required. And that actually allows me to stop pinging the providers so frequently, stop having redundant workflows, and actually sort of expands out that value proposition in multiple of those work streams. And, one of the privileges we have being at InterSystems is that we get to do this in a lot of places. We have been experts in managing clinical data for decades. You can see some of the people and customers that we work with. We've been managing clinical data, and we've been managing those connections, right? All of the interoperability that's required to set up those feeds, clean up that data, surface it in the right ways. And so it's an honor to unlock the power of clinical data for plans, for that to be part of that ecosystem, to not simply be claims-based, but actually allow for that reduction in overhead and allow for the efficiencies in order to have the improved accuracy and the improved reflection of a true member record in a meaningful way, to be able to facilitate not just RADV audits, but actually all of those workflows that are important. I believe we're switching over now back to Megan, but I want to defer to you.
Excellent.
Yeah, Megan, I'm happy to. I wanted to be sure we preserve time for questions, so I'm going to stop talking so we can get to some questions. I see them building.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for sharing these insights with us today. So we will be moving into the discussion section of our presentation. And through this discussion, we will continue to take questions from the audience. So we do encourage you to participate. First one here, can the strategy still work in markets where there is no or limited participation in the local health information exchange?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Megan. I think here's the reality. As long as you have a feed, you can make this work, right? Health information exchanges are a robust source of clinical data and a huge part of the health IT ecosystem. But actually, any direct feed can provide you the CCDAs that are required. And that actually allows for the ability to address these challenges. And so it could be an HIE, it could be a national network, it could be Epic Payer platform, it could be feeds directly from providers. I think there's a lot of opportunity in order to get that.
Excellent. Thank you. How important is identity management or member matching for enabling these workflows to operate effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to jump on that too, just because it's so integral to sort of that larger value prop and conversation. You have to know who your member is, and you have to identify them correctly, no matter how the data comes in. And I think this is another area that we continue to see that there is an opportunity for efficiency, because if you're having data feeds come in multiple ways and data come in multiple ways, and each time you have to re-perform that member matching, and then you have additional overhead that isn't necessary. And if you put them all in one place and you ensure that you are doing that accurate matching, then you have confidence that you have a unified longitudinal health record for that member that then can be used. So it's an essential part, and it's one that really, with a centralized source, can be leveraged really effectively.
Excellent. Thank you. How quickly can a health plan expect to see ROI after adopting this approach, and what KPIs should they be tracking?
I'm going to jump in. I'm glad that my colleague is excited. I'm excited too. It should. I mean, once it's up and running, it should be, pretty quickly. I mean, we've been talking about there's really two good things you're going to get here. One is a decrease in the chart chases and an increase in the accuracy of the risk adjustment. But obviously, there's some just bureaucratic natural lags in terms of the risk adjustment. It's applied to the next year, but the decrease in the chart chases should be very quick, because in effect, what are you doing when you're requesting charts? It goes back to what we've been talking about. All too often, what you're doing is literally requesting an electronic document that another part of your organization already has. Now, when you love the emphasis on, so how do I crosswalk that to a KPI? So decrease in chart chase, the only thing that's really important is you probably want to turn it into a ratio. You want to, so what are the number of chart chases you're having per audited member? And the reason why I do that goes to the fact that, we're going to see a dramatic spike in the number of members who are audited. Just go back to some of the numbers we were talking about, going from, an audit that's 35 enrollees to 200 enrollees. So to be sure you see that immediate improvement, it's important not to just look at the reduction in chart chases, but by audited member.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question, you work with numerous plans. Have they all adopted this approach, or why not?
Great question. So the honest answer is no. And so, why not? Well, the first reason is it's pretty new. We've been ingesting CCDA data, but just like Julie was talking about, there's multiple applications. And this application is kind of a newer application of that information. There's a couple other things, though. One is there's two things going on here, and that is taking advantage of those data streams you already have and then applying AI. And so I think it's really important for people on the line to understand what's going on here. You might be seeing a lot of things about all these AI things that can do some of the linkage, but if you start just with the AI in terms of truly kind of transforming the process in a positive way, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. So the reality is, okay, you're still doing all the chart chasing, and then you can feed it into a large language model to do some of that linkage. But if you really want to get the full return, what you have to do is harvest those data feeds. And for a number of organizations, there's a fair bit of data cleaning that has to go on, even though these are standardized fields and this is all knowable. It's something we've been doing for a long time. So there is also this little bump in the road, or not so little bump in the road. You have to be sure that you have the appropriate processes and structures in place, that you can standardize the data, normalize the data. But I think the big one is actually the last one, and that's just organizational silos. One of the things that, we work with plans and all different departments with plans. And one of the things that kind of strikes us here is the people who understand that they have the data is the IT and the interoperability people, but the people who understand what is the data they need are the risk adjustment people. And so it's kind of been fun introducing some of the risk adjustment folk to the interoperability folk and say, hey, by the way, risk adjustment team, you should really go talk to your interoperability team because they're getting the data feeds that we're talking to you about. You don't have to ask for that information. So those are my three. I mean, just newness. You have to be sure that you are appropriately normalizing the data so you can use it. And I think it's really important for interoperability teams and risk adjustment teams to start talking to each other to realize, you know what, we're already automatically getting this data that now you're requesting. Sorry if I went long there, but
no, I think that's great.
There's some things that need to happen, but gosh, in the mountains that we have to climb in healthcare to make healthcare better, I think all three of these are very doable.
Absolutely. How do you validate that the AI is applying CMS HCC logic correctly? What quality assurance processes should be in place?
Well, I think it's important to note, right, what we surface is a confidence score. And that confidence score gives you an indication of how likely it is to be true, but it absolutely requires the traceability that is needed, the accountability that's required with the chart reviewer, and that these will actually have audits in place with them, right? You have to remember these actually link to CCDAs, which by definition have electronically signed encounter-based documentation around the summary of the encounter. And so it actually gives you the clinical data to take a look at and then actually do that matching. And so, so it's not a blind guess. It offers all of the pieces for that chart reviewer to take a look and have confidence in what's being done.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is, we do have some of our plans who are farther along starting to think about, is there a certain point where that confidence score is so high that they might say, okay, we don't have to review that, but they're not getting there by setting an arbitrary line. They're getting it there by having a human in a loop and seeing time and again and again and again, when you get above a certain confidence score, it's literally always right.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question says, in a way, are you optimizing suspecting and chart chasing, or will there be a direct use of interop data to CCDA data to close gaps?
So yes, ironically, some of the plans we're working with, they've already started to use their data feeds to close care gaps. So it's a little bit of when Julie went through that when she talked about all the different use cases, actually the use case they're adding now is, hey, we can use the exact same clinical data that we're ingesting and putting into this kind of unified member care record to actually not need chart chasing and not need suspecting. We were already using it to close care gaps. But yes, we do imagine that the reverse is going to go too, which is that plans to actually start with this use case of leveraging the data feeds and AI to reduce chart chasing and suspecting. Then now they're going to have real-time data or closer to real-time data that's timely enough that they can actually leverage it with their care management teams. Of course, you're going to have to be sure that you connect those data flows into your existing care management systems, but again, doable.
Great. What tools are needed to parse and normalize the CCD data?
Important ones. I think that's a great question, because it talks to the fact that it needs to be usable data, right? It needs to be deduplicated, normalized, harmonized. It needs to make sense in a way that it's not just a pipe, right? It's not a pipe from point A to point B, but it's making it usable in order to address this key use case. And it really requires technology that does that clean. And right. And so it does it to actually take a look and actually make it usable and meaningful in that way. And so I think it's important to understand that the volume overload is real on everyone for data. And so making sure it actually surfaces the meaningful parts and does that in an understandable, consumable way is really essential.
Yeah, I mean, for the people who aren't so familiar with electronic data, I think what they need to understand is, yes, there's a standard, but when a CCDA document comes in, it is often a lot of information. Like somebody once said to me, if you actually print it all and stacked it all up, one CCDA document coming in could be a foot, high. So there's all this information in this. And the good news is there's not a lot of standardization in terms of it's this field, we know what this piece is, we know what this piece is, we know what this piece is. But all that information then needs to be pulled out and stored appropriately because you can't match that 12-inch document to a diagnosis. You want to be matching the different fields. And I think it can be incredibly powerful because risk, chart chasing is such a huge problem. But all we're talking about, the really good and great news, is if you do that for risk adjustment, if that's your first use case, you should at least also be thinking about all the other use cases, because it would be a travesty to just do that for risk adjustment or go on to your next use case and not have thought about there's actually going to be 3 or 4 here. So when I build that model, I want to, maybe my first stop is going to be risk adjustment, but at least build that model so that it'll serve all your other use cases as well, because at that point, the cost to fuel those other use cases should be incremental. You should not have to put big stakes back in the ground.
Got it. How should plans communicate that they're making the shift to the providers they work with?
So, it's always a really hard question, right? Because, it depends. It depends upon, what's the working relationship with your network providers? How collaborative you are, how arm's length you are. So just for everybody on the line, I'm going to give a vanilla general answer, but please adjust this based upon your own unique relationships between plans and providers. In general, this is an area where I really encourage plans to first do the work. And as that KPI starts to show improvement, to then share it with providers, to let them know, look, we're doing things to reduce the burden we've been placing upon you. But the reason why I say, get going, get results, and then share it with providers is there should be no changes in their workflow they have to know up front. I mean, hopefully they might even begin to say, hey, plan, you don't seem to be imposing on me as much as you used to with chart requests. That would be great. I don't know if you're going to see that just because of the uptick in terms of the scope and the cadence of the RADV audits. But again, if I were a plan in general, I would say get to work, get those demands for chart chasing to go down, and then that's the appropriate time to share with the providers what you've been doing to make that happen.
Great. What are the biggest benefits of the approach you recommend? Is it more about reducing chart retrieval volume, improving risk adjustment accuracy, or both?
Well, I hope you're asking this question because we've been arguing for both, and the answer really is both. As a matter of fact, when we work with plans and providers, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, in healthcare, it's often challenging to find a win-win, and this really is a win-win. You are reducing inefficiency while you're actually simultaneously increasing the accuracy of the risk adjustment process. So it's really both. Just going back to the prior question, I just think you might see, in terms of the immediacy of the ROI, you might see the demands for the chart chasing come down, and then it's going to be a little bit farther out before you see at least the economic benefits of more accurate risk adjustment.
Can earlier access to diagnosis data be leveraged to improve care management as well as risk adjustment accuracy?
Yeah, I mean, if people missed this in my prior response, absolutely. So one of the problems that we have in terms of the current process is by the time we've pulled the chart, we've reviewed the chart, a lot of time has passed, and that really limits the ability for care management to intervene in a timely way. So one of the advantages of this is we're not waiting for the suspecting process. I don't think we covered this, but the CCDA documents, they fire. Like, I mean, Julie, I'm trying to ask you, I mean, it's like really soon after the encounter, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is near real time. It's coming in. The plan is getting this information. Again, all these things that we're talking about in terms of the process, this is all automated. So all the relevant information is peeled off. It's put it into that unified care record, and it's sitting there really quickly. So now that information is available and not only can be, but should be used to positively impact care management. So great question. And if we weren't clear on that, why it's so important and the time nature, I'm glad you guys asked it.
Excellent. How should stakeholders be thinking about data quality, governance, and compliance as health plans expand their reliance on clinical data feeds?
I think this is an interesting one because so much has happened in the industry from a regulatory perspective, right? The expectations around getting clinical data across plans has really been front and center in many ways over the last recent years. And getting data in is part of the story. Making that data usable is essential. And no matter what the use case is, you really want to have trust in whatever vendor you use for that partnership, because clinical data is, to Stephen's point, much more recent, much more comprehensive, and can be overwhelming if not trusted. And so, data quality, governance, compliance, oversight, understanding are all really essential when you think about getting health plans within that larger healthcare ecosystem of having the same reasonable access to clinical data that is needed for the workflows and the use cases that they're required to meet. And I think there's a great opportunity here with risk. There's also a great opportunity with quality, great opportunity with care gaps, great opportunity to actually make members' lives better, to actually reduce provider abrasion, and to become more of an integral part of access to the data that's required in order to fulfill the missions of the organizations. And I think that that's really a prime North Star to think about all of the opportunity here.
Yeah, and I see we're running out of time. I just want to expand that a little bit. It's not just the governance, it's really kind of organizationally, how are you meeting each other? And before we get off the phone, I really want to encourage anybody on the line who's in the risk adjustment side of the house to really kind of reach out to your interoperability teams and better understand what is the clinical data you're getting electronically. And for the people on the clinical data side, yes, you guys have spent this time building this awesome asset. This is a really great application of the asset you've built. And you should really, I hope, if you haven't done so already, it's not just about the AI, it's about automating the flow of the data that you're pushing into the large language model. It's those two things together that I think can have a huge and very positive impact on healthcare.
Well said. And a great point to end on as we are out of time for today. I'd like to thank our speakers, Stephen Burko and Julie Smith, for sharing with us how Medicare Advantage plans can move away from chasing charts, which increases costs and creates friction for providers, to a clinical data-first approach that can both improve risk adjustment and create much-needed efficiencies. Stephen and Julie, we appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us here today. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.